a Nobody's Project production. Our past is full of amazing lives lived, brilliant and intelligent individuals who break through artistic, scientific, military and economical barriers to forge our civilization forward. We know of the greatest personalities through our history classes, our books and podcasts, but there are countless others who work diligently who don't make the shortest of the short list of historical geniuses. There are numerous individuals who hold up platforms on which our historical favourites stand upon. One of these favourites is Sir Isaac Newton, who once said humbly, "If I've been able to see further, it's only because I stood on the shoulders of giants." And so look further and further we have as a civilization. If we go back only 140 years to around the time Back to the Future 3 was set, there have been incredible advancements in science, medicine, technology, flight, space, internet, and all the rest. So let's look at the life of someone who was born back in 1892 and lived all the way through to actually be able to see Back to the Future when it got released in 1985. And that is Princess Caroline of Schönberg-Hartenstein. Princess Caroline was born in the now named Czech Republic. She lived through the turn of the century in her childhood, the First Flight and World War I in her 20s. Princess Caroline saw the rise of the Nazis in her 40s, then World War II, nuclear weapons, the Cold War, and the space race in her 70s. And, most likely to her disgust, the early days of Europop and electro music in her 80s and 90s. Princess Caroline bore witness to an amazing period of global change, scientific and technological advancement, and she had an incredible front row seat. Princess Caroline's first husband, Constantine, was one of these lesser-known genius go-getters of the late 19th and early 20th century. He was born in Austria to Greek immigrants and succeeded in his studies from a young age. Constantine was the first Austrian to gain an international pilot certificate in 1912. His studies and career, however, was in psychiatry and neurology. He is credited with identifying and describing the disease encephalitis in 1917, and he also went on to publish one of the first cytoarchitectural studies, which is the mapping of the human brain's neural structures and cortices. Constantine's family had been granted a baronship, and their family name had been changed from the Greek Economo to von Economo. And it is this name that he gave to a very specific new neuron structure he also identified and described in his monumental work, The Cytoarchitectronics of the Cerebral Cortex of Adult Man, published in 1925. We will spend some time looking at these neurons and the frontal cortex as part of this project. This is because the latest fMRI technology and recent studies have started to clarify what these special neurons do. It appears they facilitate how we behave socially. More importantly, it's these neurons that are missing in psychopaths and damaged in sociopaths. So thanks Princess Caroline for being a wonderful support to Constantine. And Constantine, please stand still so we can stand on your shoulders for a while as we attempt to look even further into the human brain to hopefully find out what it means to be a human being. Too Many Arseholes is a social project looking at the rise of pathological behaviours in our society and the erosion of social trust, creating a better conversation around why this is and finding a way forward to a greater humanity. This podcast is also part of a larger social project that we want you, the listener, to join in on. Key to this project is bringing together threads from many academic disciplines to create a body of knowledge we can develop with you to help us all with having better conversations around these pathological behaviours in our personal and social circles. Thanks for joining today for Season 1, Episode 5. In today's episode, we start to build an understanding of what is the science behind all this. We have a quick look at the history and the early interpretations of what our brains do. We get a better understanding of mirror and von Economo neurons, how technology has aided in scanning the brain and identifying pathological patterns. We also look at the various ways our brains can be impacted through accidents, abuse, and poor choices. And finally, what current options we have to recover through therapy. We also want to apologise in advance for mispronounced words and names. This is a science and scientists-focused episode, so we are trying our best. And so thanks for joining us and coming along on this journey of reflection and discovery as we attempt to unpack and better understand why there's just too many arseholes. Our own human brain has been an unmapped territory, a misunderstood organ, a puzzle that many humans have sought prestige from by pretending they've solved its inner workings. It's probably one of the hardest things to do, that is, to think about and understand the thing that we think with. Our study of the human brain is a great example of the phrase, science is not about getting things right, it's about getting things less wrong. And we have been slowly getting things less wrong for a few millennia. Fucking Aristotle once proposed that the heart was the centre of human consciousness and that the brain was nothing more than a cooling system for the blood. Well, haven't we come a long way from there? The Egyptians were also very interested in the brain, and there is evidence of cranial holes drilled into living humans to help with relieving pressure or assisting with mental disorders. But we don't really know for sure. The brain has been an enigma for humankind ever since, well, forever. Our philosophers, psychologists, and anthropologists have all contributed to better understanding us and our brains. Scattered through history are attempts to learn and understand this most complex of biologies. The medieval Muslim world wrote quite extensively on medical problems with the brain, and there are smatterings of efforts all the way through to the 1700s, which is where we start to really get some traction of what exactly is all this grey matter between our ears. And that is mostly because we hadn't understood electricity and the nervous system for starters. Luigi Galvani's pioneering work in the late 1700s started a journey with studies in the electrical excitability in muscles and nerves. Émile du Bois-Reymond and Hermann van Helmholtz continued pushing the research into the electrical nature of nerve signals through into the 1800s. We also had greatly improved our microscope technologies, which opened the door to exploring some of the body's smallest structures, nerves and neurons. It wasn't until near the end of the 1800s that researchers were starting to identify how different parts of the brain affected how we functioned, thought and sensed the world around us. And this was with thanks to what happened to people like Phineas Gage, but we'll talk about him another day. Along with many other schools and luminaries around the world, Constantin von Economo was an unassuming, one of many, dedicated intellect on the subject of the brain, and his detailed work in creating the psychoarchitectronics of the cerebral cortex of man set up many researchers for the future of exploring and understanding the mysteries of the brain. We'll quote the opening of an article from The New Scientist. Are these the brain cells that give us consciousness? July 2012, as they tell this part of the story really well. Quote, the origin of consciousness has been one of the biggest mysteries of all time, occupying philosophers and scientists for generations. So it's strange to think that a little-known neuroscientist called Constantin von Economo may have unearthed an important clue nearly 90 years ago. When he peered down the lens of his microscope in 1926, von Economo saw a handful of brain cells that were long, spindly, and much larger than those around them. In fact, they looked so out of place that at first he thought they were a sign of some kind of disease. But the more brains he looked at, the more these particular cells he found, and always in the same two small areas that evolved to process smell and flavours. Von Economo briefly pondered what these rod and corkscrew cells, as he called them, might be doing, but without the technology to delve much deeper, he soon moved on to more promising lines of inquiry. Little more was said about these neurons until nearly 80 years later, when Esther Niemczycki and Patrick Hoff from Mount Sinai University in New York also stumbled across clusters of these strange-looking neurons. Now, after more than a decade of functional imaging and post-mortem studies, we are beginning to piece together their story. Certain lines of evidence hint that they may help build rich inner lives we call consciousness, including emotions, our sense of self, empathy, and our ability to navigate social relationships." End quote. Now that's a big claim to make, especially when we still struggle to identify and describe consciousness today. But go and read the article by Caroline Williams and come to your own conclusions. What we have seen in repeated studies across the neuroscience community is the linkage between von Economo neurons, VENs, in the prefrontal cortices and socio-emotional behaviours in adult humans. It's a lot more complicated than we alluded to in the opening episode. Yes, less than 20% of VENs in a brain is linked to psychopathic behaviour. But our brains are not that simple, and diving into the biological psychopathology won't yield a clear set of results. If a scan shows A, then we can't come to conclusion B without understanding the whole person. But as we'll see later in this episode, PET and fMRI scans have been extensively used by neuroscientists to assist psychologists to find links between the brain structure and how we think and function as a human. Continuous advancement in the different brain scanning technologies have opened up the ability now for medical teams to see and diagnose brain disorders and diseases. It was only up until around a decade ago that neurons and the smallest of brain structures were only able to be studied in post-mortem, which creates a few problems if we are wanting to study and diagnose someone who is still alive. The human brain is made up of two hemispheres with four main lobes: the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes, roughly spread evenly across both hemispheres from front to back. Each specialises in different functions, such as the frontal lobe for executive planning and decision-making, the parietal lobe for processing sensory information, the temporal lobe for memory and language, and the occipital lobe for vision. These lobes are critical parts of the cerebrum, working together through complex neural pathways to enable complex human functions like thought, memory, and emotion. Mirror neurons are brain cells that activate both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing the same action. In humans, these neurons are thought to be located in the premotor cortex and inferior parietal cortex, with potential roles in sociocognition, empathy, and language learning. Mirror neurons fire when an individual performs a motor act and also when they observe another individual performing the same or similar act. It's the basis of monkey see, monkey do. This is a simplified way to understand how these neurons work, as they were first discovered in monkeys who showed activity in these neurons when they watched other monkeys perform actions. These neurons are believed to play a role in understanding others' intentions, feeling empathy, and facilitating social interactions. But the jury is still out on whether their absence is part of a psychopathic brain. Mirror neurons were first identified in the premotor cortex and inferior parietal lobule of the macaw's brain. Mirror neurons were first discovered in macaw's brains by a team of Italian researchers in 1992. The researchers, led by Giacomo Rizzolatti at the University of Parma, reported their findings in a 1992 paper, and the neurons were given their name in a subsequent publication in 1996. Subsequent research then identified mirror neurons in human brains in 2010. That's only 15 years ago, so this is all very new knowledge. In humans, similar mirror neuron brain activity has been found in the premotor cortex, the supplementary motor area, and the inferior parietal cortex and regions of the superior temporal sulcus. Where mirror neurons stand out from many other neural structures in the brain is that they support advanced interrelations between people. Complex group behaviours like performance, music, military, sports are all supported by the unique utility mirror neurons provide the human brain. When you watch someone get injured and you wince and almost feel their pain, that's triggering a lot of activity in the mirror neuron structures. Additional new studies that are contributing to our understanding of how our brain's configuration enables thought, decisions, and behaviours is the research into von Economo neurons. More importantly, how our genetics, our early upbringing, and any potential brain injuries can affect how they function, and then how a person loses their ability to behave pro-socially. A recent article published on the 14th of October 2022 by the Journal of Neuropsychiatry and Clinical Neurosciences explores von Economo neuron involvement in social cognitive and emotional impairments in neuropsychiatric disorders. The article refers to von Economo neurons as VENs, and the below section focuses on behavioural variant frontotemporal dementia, BV-FTD, a neurological disorder that impacts socio-emotional behaviour. Before we get into this article, let's quickly discuss a very prominent case of BV-FTD, and that is Mr. Die Hard himself, Bruce Willis. Bruce's case has been well known but also a private affair. His years leading up to his current situation have been filled with working hard in the film industry up until the point he could no longer work. Bruce has a strong medical and family support network around him, which would make managing his challenges as the dementia progresses best in class. And he's worked hard for that, as he and his family prepared for the road ahead many years ago. For many people who were affected by BV-FTD prior to its discovery, or those currently affected without the access to diagnosis or treatment, those around them would be watching their behaviour deteriorate as they lost the emotional and social connections to those they loved, but often without much loss in other brain functions. Back to the article, the section on neuropsychiatric implications from the article says, quote, "Stereological studies have indicated that VENs are selectively targeted in the early stages of BV-FTD and appear to be related to impairments in empathy, self-control, and social awareness. Other investigations have supported the idea that VENs are more susceptible to loss in persons with FTD than in a control group and in patients with Alzheimer's disease. Accordingly, VEN pathobiologically appear to contribute to socio-emotional deficiencies in persons with FTD, including empathy deficiencies amongst individuals with BV-FTD." End quote. The conclusion of the article summarises that VENs are unique in the neural structures in the front area of the brain, and that they have links to socio-emotional functions, including social cognition and related autonomic functions. Although the specific functions are still unknown, it also calls for more research in this area, as the alterations of the VENs are evident in schizophrenia spectrum disorders, behavioural variant frontotemporal dementia, autism, and alcohol use disorders. Therapeutic options may be available for the above disorders with more research. Recent research on mirror and von Economo neurons continues to advocate for further research in these areas, and as such we are putting a shout out to our neuroscientists to join in the conversation and bring clarity and academic caution to these recent findings and publications. Of the many psychologists, neuroscientists, and other academic professionals researching and publishing articles on psychopathology, Professor James Fallon, not the Late Show host, the other one, has a very unique perspective on the subject of neuroscience. He was Professor of Psychiatry and Human Behaviour and Emeritus Professor of Anatomy and Neurobiology at the University of California's Irvine School of Medicine. He put in decades of research and insights into studying multiple parts of the human brain and human behaviour. A key interest for Professor James was the links between criminal, psychopathic people and their brain activity. Professor James has spent a lifetime of work looking at many aspects of neuroscience, psychiatry, and biological psychopathology. His research on PET scans from prison inmates advanced our understanding of the brain activity differences in psychopathic people compared with an average human brain. When reviewing the PET scans of psychopathic people, he identified areas in the prefrontal lobe that had a distinct lack of brain activity. During interviews, he was able to show in a very easy to understand way PET scans of an average human brain, and then go on to show and identify the lack of brain activity in the same prefrontal lobe area of the brain. But what made Professor James stand out from many other researchers in this field was that he surprised himself and his family when his control group of normal people's brain scans, his family's brain scans, included a PET scan of a psychopathic's brain. He thought it was a joke planted by his research team, but no. The PET scan of the psychopathic's brain was in fact his brain. Professor James is an amazing case study in the field of biological psychopathology, as he was able to propose that his upbringing, good moral parenting, and strong social circles guided him through a successful life all the way through to the age of 76. Jokingly, his wife Diane made some comments around, well, that would explain a few things. And there are interviews of other psychologists commenting on Professor James's character and how he did display some pathological behaviours. But all in all, this case study can help us enormously with finding ways for psychopaths and sociopaths to find a place in society where they can just fit in. Just because you have a genetic or neurological disorder, it doesn't mean you can't be supported and rehabilitated to some degree. But before we get into the latest science of therapy options, let's have a good look through all the common causes of malformed, damaged or traumatized prefrontal cortices. Our current understanding of the stages of brain growth and maturity include 5 age groups. This doesn't include the pre-birthing development, nor does it include any group for those over 35 to 40 years of age, which interestingly is evident in some social structure age restrictions. The first stage is the early childhood, 0 to 5 years. This is a period of rapid brain development, with the brain reaching approximately 80% of its adult size by age 2. Synaptic pruning, where unused connections are eliminated, also plays a crucial role in refining brain networks based on experience. It's within this stage that the von Economo neurons fully develop. In the primary school ages 6 to 12 years, the foundation laid in the early years continues to be built upon, with significant development in the cortical grey matter and white matter, especially in the frontal and parietal regions. Adolescents aged between 12 and 18 years see a lot of maturing in the brain and in behaviour. While the brain is nearly full-sized, it undergoes extensive rewiring and maturation. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive functions, continues to mature, which influences decision-making and impulse control. In the early adulthood years of 18 to 25 plus, the brain development, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, continues to grow, typically up until around age 25. This prolonged period allows for the development of higher level cognitive functions like advanced reasoning and impulse control. And it's here that we add another 2 stages, 35 to roughly 70 years, and another capturing the final decades of a full life. From around 35 years of age, there are no further changes to the brain's maturing, but it is evident in society that people past 35 years of age do display their highest social capabilities. Maybe there's additional knowledge yet to be discovered in this field, or maybe it's all anecdotal and not supported by science. But it is evident in the US Constitution, as you can't be a president if you're under the age of 40. As we have covered off already a few times on this podcast, there are clear differences in psychopathic brain structures and sociopathic brain structures. Psychopaths' disorder is based on their genes, where sociopaths have either poor brain development in the first stage of maturing or brain traumas at any stage throughout their life. To understand this more simply, we're going to break down the sociopathic disorders into 2 parts: brain development and brain trauma. As a baby's brain matures from birth through to 5 years of age, the brain grows in size and the basic neural structures form. If a growing baby is not given adequate nutrition or is provided with incorrect nutrition, they can experience a lack of essential neural growth and development. Exposure to toxic chemicals, especially tetraethyl lead, have been found to impact greatly on neural development in this first age group. If you were aged between 0 and 5 from the 20s through to the 70s and lived in a built-up area with lots of cars and trucks like an inner city, then quite possibly you were affected. But it's not only nutrition and poison that can affect early neural development. The basic activities found in a loving home are also essential to a growing baby's brain. The cuddling and soothing from a parent or carer, the safety and stability of a home environment, The stimulation and early learning through play and outside activities all contribute to how a growing brain develops. It's the absence of these and other critical early childhood development needs that impact directly on a child and limits their potential to mature into a responsible adult if these effects are not identified and addressed later in their pre-adult years. Unfortunately, there is no safe age for a person to not be affected by stress and abuse. Children are able to get over it is not a very accurate phrase, and one that seems to comfort a parent through ignorance, not knowledge. Modern studies are finding the opposite, with childhood traumas often leading to antisocial behaviour as an adult. It is understood that abuse in these early stages of a child's development leads often to the cycle of abuse reoccurring when the child is an adult. It's this cycle of abuse, and also the generational trauma cycle, that we as a project would love to explore and understand for the betterment of humanity. Brain traumas can include disease, stress, head injury, alcohol abuse, stroke, and other mental or physical traumas. The full extent of the impact on the brain of alcohol consumption is still being realised through in-depth research. People highly prone to brain development issues and/or damage due to alcohol consumption are pregnant mothers for their unborn babies, children or teenagers, and the excessive consumption of alcohol over time in adults. While alcohol consumption doesn't directly destroy VENS, studies suggest that long-term alcohol abuse and alcoholism can lead to a significant reduction in their population, particularly in the anterior insula. This reduction may be linked to impaired social cognition and difficulty controlling alcohol seeking and use in individuals. VENS, found in the anterior insula and prefrontal cortex, are associated with higher order cognitive functions like social cognition and empathy. Research indicates that these neurons are vulnerable to ongoing alcohol consumption. While the exact mechanism is not fully understood, alcohol's neurotoxic effects on the brain structure and function, including the disruption of communications between neurons, may contribute to VENS reduction. The diminished VENS in alcoholics may explain the loss of top-down control over the amygdala, which plays a crucial role in emotional processing and decision-making. This can lead to impaired social cognition and, again, difficulty regulating alcohol intake. It's important to note that alcohol doesn't directly kill VENS. Instead, it appears to disrupt their function and reduce their number over time in individuals with alcoholism. There are a number of infections and diseases that can affect the brain and, more importantly, the frontal lobe. Neurodegenerative conditions such as prefrontal dementia, Parkinson's disease and Huntington's disease, as well as brain tumours, blood infections and other conditions like Alzheimer's disease. When the frontal lobe is impacted by disease, infection or dementia, the patient's behaviour or ability to behave prosocially is at a higher risk of degrading. In cases of BV-FTD, the dementia specifically targets the VENS in the prefrontal lobe, and this person's general cognition will not be impacted. Only their ability to read social cues, show empathy, consider others' needs, and other socially required behaviours. Excuse the pun, but explaining why head injuries can affect a person's ability to behave socially is a no-brainer. More prevalent in our modern day activities are our full contact sports. A professional sports person can have a long career playing full contact sport, well into their 30s and 40s. Over that time, they may suffer a number of small to large head knocks culminating in sports-related traumatic brain injury, TBI. We intend to put at least a few episodes into the impacts of head injuries through contact sports on the average person, mostly because these head knocks are often front-on contact, which is where the frontal lobe is located. Emerging studies confirm earlier findings of associations between emotional recognition and post-TBI behaviour, providing partial evidence for models proposing social recognition as one of the prerequisites for adequate social functioning. It's still very early days for any well-known and recognised therapy options for a person identified with psychopathy or sociopathy. Up until quite recently, the common response was that they can't be rehabilitated. Just ask James Grigson, Dr. Death from Texas. But we're not here to accept that view. It is too inhumane a thought to give up on any person, especially with a mental disorder. Throughout most of the 20th century, people suffered antisocial behavioural disorders were potentially subjected to all kinds of treatment, from restraints and isolation to electrotherapy. Up until recently, talk therapy through psychologists and counsellors was the main publicly available option for therapy. But talk therapy relies on the patient being honest and open with the therapist. That's not something pathological people can do. They are happy talking, but they aren't going to be honest about themselves, and a therapist should not trust anything they say. We are starting to see better results in the psychedelic therapy trials. People suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, are getting great results from MDMA, also known as ecstasy sessions, with trained and licensed therapists. There are strong cases being made for MDMA and other traditional recreational drugs like psilocybin and LSD being thoroughly trialled to better support society with options to help rehabilitate a person who has suffered abuse of all kinds. The impacts of crime, veterans and participants in war, and other traumatic experiences. It's the not giving up on anyone regardless of their mental condition that we want to bring back to the conversation. Yes, there are some pretty messed up people out there doing some pretty messed up stuff. We have the law and legal systems to help manage that. But could we open new doors through better conversations where the combined social discourse better identifies emerging behaviours in growing teenagers and adults? To start this better conversation shouldn't be a taboo, nor should it be uncomfortable. It comes from a place of love and concern. It also doesn't finish with a shoulder shrug because there are no reputable therapies or pathways a person could take to get help or support. Can these conversations be brought into the mainstream of society's discourse? And can we start to proactively get a grip on what causes pathological behaviours and how we can meet these challenges head on? Sorry, another bad pun. But puns aside, to get to this better place, we need to start having a better social discourse. So please, join in the conversation. Thanks again for taking the time to listen in. In today's science and history lesson, we intended to give you a brain dump, sorry for the puns, on where the science is currently at. There is still a lot to learn, and we hope further research will aid this better conversation. Also, please note we're about halfway through our opening series of monologues to give the podcast, project, and conversation some momentum. This is intentional as we lay the foundations for this social project's themes. Too Many Arseholes is researched, written, and produced by Nobody's Project. To put this series together, we have drawn on many sources, publications, books, and podcasts. Throughout this series, we will ask you to go and read or listen to an article, book, or podcast to accompany our episodes. Check out our show notes for recommendations for upcoming episodes and also for our sources. It's important that we acknowledge and promote the people and the work they have published that have inspired this project. And finally, we are always keen to hear from you. Do you have an experience, idea, or insight that you'd love to share with the project? If so, please send an email to contactus@toomanyarseholes.com. Visit our social media pages and please feel free to get in contact and have a better conversation with us. To support the project, you can go to our Patreon page where you can get more information on the project and support us. You can also join our Patreon group and get early and ad-free episodes as well as other benefits. You can also like, subscribe, and review the podcast to help spread the conversation. And the best way to support us is to share the podcast with your family, friends, and colleagues so you can have a better conversation with them. Until we catch up again, give a shit about our planet and just please, don't be an arsehole.